There's something profoundly tragic about watching a world die. Not in some grand cataclysmic explosion or through supernatural forces, but slowly, inevitably, like the setting sun at the end of a long day. Red Dead Redemption 2 is a game about death. The death of the Wild West, the death of freedom, the death of ideals, and most importantly, the death of the men who refused to see it coming. When Rockstar Games decided to take us back to 1899, 12 years before the events of the first game, they weren't just giving us a prequel, they were crafting an elegy, a funeral song for an America that never truly existed, except in our collective imagination, and showing us exactly how the myths we tell ourselves can destroy us from within. The opening text of Red Dead Redemption 2 doesn't pull any punches. It tells you straight up that the Wild West is over, that law and order are taking hold, and that the few remaining outlaw gangs are being hunted down and destroyed. That word destroyed is even underlined, just in case you missed it. This isn't a story about whether the Vanderlinde gang will survive. It's a story about how they fall apart, and more importantly, why. From the very first moments of the game, as you push through a blizzard in the mountains with someone dying, the game is screaming at you that there's no happy ending here. The inevitability of failure is baked into every frame, every conversation Dutch makes. This is a story about men who are already ghosts. They just don't know it yet. What makes this approach so brilliant is that it completely changes how you experience the narrative. In most games, you're fighting for victory, working towards that triumphant ending where you overcome the odds. Here, you already know how it ends. You know Dutch becomes a madman. You know John Marston survives to hunt down his former brothers. You know the gang falls apart. So instead of asking what will happen, the game forces you to ask why. Why did these men follow Dutch off a cliff? Why did Arthur stay loyal for so long? Why did John come back after abandoning them for a year? The game transforms from a story about events into a character study, and that's where its true genius lies. The Vanderlinde gang isn't just a group of outlaws. It's a family, a philosophy, a way of life, and a cult of personality all wrapped into one. Dutch Vanderlinde built this gang on a foundation of words, beautiful words about freedom and loyalty and living outside the system. He found lost souls, people with nowhere else to go, and gave them purpose. Arthur Morgan, found at 15 after watching his father hang for theft, became Dutch's first son. John Marston, similar circumstances, became the second. Hosea Matthews, the voice of reason and Dutch's oldest friend, became the conscience. Together, they built something that felt real, that felt noble, that felt worth dying for. And that's the tragedy at the heart of this story, because it was all built on a foundation of sand. Dutch's philosophy sounds wonderful when he's giving one of his speeches around the campfire. He talks about freedom from civilization's chains, about looking out for each other, about being better than the system that oppresses people. He even has a saying, "We shoot fellas as need shooting, save fellas as need saving, and feed them as need feeding." It's simple, direct, and gives his followers a clear moral framework. The gang doesn't just rob for money, they rob from those who deserve it. They don't just kill, they kill those who need killing. They're Robin Hood figures in their own minds, taking from the rich and living free. But here's the thing about Dutch that the game slowly reveals to you. He doesn't actually believe any of it. Or maybe he did once, but somewhere along the way, the words became more important than the meaning. You can see it in how Dutch treats the women in his life. He was engaged to Susan Grimshaw until he met someone younger and prettier, a woman named Annabelle. When she was killed by Colm O'Driscoll, Dutch used her death to fuel his hatred for his rival, turning her into a martyr for his cause rather than grieving her as a person. By the time the game starts, he's with Mary Beth O'Shea, a young Irish woman who clearly adores him. But Dutch neglects her, grows tired of her, And when she has a breakdown and gets herself killed, he doesn't even care. You see him hitting on Mary Beth, one of the younger women in camp, showing that his pattern never changes. He collects people, uses them, and discards them when they're no longer useful. The same goes for his gang members. As long as you follow him without question, you're family. The moment you start to doubt, you become a traitor. Arthur Morgan spent most of his life believing in Dutch's vision. He had to, because Dutch and Hosea were the only family he had. They taught him to read, to fight, to survive. They gave him purpose when he had nothing. So when Dutch says jump, Arthur asks how high. When Dutch says rob a train, Arthur plans the heist. When Dutch says rescue Micah Bell from the gallows, Arthur does it, even though he personally can't stand the man. This loyalty is both Arthur's greatest strength and his greatest weakness. It's what makes him such an effective enforcer for the gang, but it's also what blinds him to the truth for so long. Dutch isn't the man he claims to be, and maybe he never was. The genius of Red Dead Redemption 2's narrative structure is how it slowly peels back the layers of Dutch's facade. In Chapter 1, Dutch seems like a genuinely good leader. He's the first one to volunteer to ride out into the blizzard to find missing gang members. He holds the group together with hope and determination when everything looks bleak. He makes decisions that seem to benefit everyone. Even when you learn he killed a girl during the Blackwater ferry job, it's presented as a mistake, something that happened in the chaos. The Dutch we meet at the start of the game is charismatic, likable, and easy to follow. You can see why Arthur and John dedicated their lives to this man. But the cracks are there from the beginning if you know where to look. Dutch's first big decision after escaping the mountains is to rob a train. Not just any train, but one belonging to Leviticus Cornwell, one of the most powerful men in the country. A smart leader trying to lay low wouldn't poke a bear like Cornwall, but Dutch can't help himself. He sees an opportunity and takes it. Consequences be damned. This pattern repeats throughout the entire game. Every time the gang is close to escaping, every time they have a chance to disappear and start over, Dutch makes a move that brings more heat down on them. He gets into a feud with the Braithwaite and Gray families, two powerful clans that end up costing the gang dearly. He kidnaps and murders Angelo Bronte, bringing the full force of the law down on them in Saint Denis. He kills Leviticus Cornwall in broad daylight, ensuring the Pinkertons will never stop hunting them. Each decision makes sense in isolation. There's always a reason, always a justification, but together they form a pattern of self-destruction. What makes Dutch's downfall so compelling is that it's not sudden. There's no single moment where he snaps and becomes evil. Instead, it's a gradual process of decay, like watching a building slowly crumble. Some people point to the trolley crash in Saint Denis, where Dutch hits his head as the turning point. Others point to Hosea's death, the loss of his moral compass and oldest friend. But I think the real answer is that Dutch was always this person. He just got better at hiding it over the years. The pressure of the Pinkertons closing in, the losses mounting, the loyalty of his followers wavering, all of it stripped away his carefully constructed persona until only the raw truth remained. Dutch van der Linde is a narcissist who built a cult of personality around himself. And when that cult started to crumble, he couldn't handle it. Micah Bell is the catalyst that accelerates Dutch's transformation. When Micah joins the gang, he immediately recognizes what Dutch really wants. Not freedom for everyone, but power for himself. Micah feeds Dutch's ego, never questions his decisions, and encourages his worst impulses. He whispers poison in Dutch's ear about Arthur's disloyalty, about John's betrayal, about everyone who dares to question the great Dutch. And Dutch eats it up because Micah gives him what he truly craves: unconditional obedience. Arthur questions Dutch because he cares about the gang's survival. John questions Dutch because he's trying to protect his family. But Micah never questions,
and that makes him more valuable to Dutch than 2 decades of loyalty from Arthur. The dynamic between Dutch and Micah perfectly encapsulates one of the game's central themes, the danger of blind loyalty. Micah is objectively a worse person than almost anyone else in the gang. He's racist, he's cruel, he's selfish, and he's eventually revealed to be a rat working with the Pinkertons. But none of that matters to Dutch because Micah tells him what he wants to hear. Meanwhile, Arthur, who has dedicated his entire adult life to Dutch and the gang, gets pushed aside because he dares to suggest that maybe starting a war with the US Army isn't the best plan. It's a brutal illustration of how narcissistic leaders operate. Loyalty isn't about dedication or sacrifice. It's about agreement. The moment you stop agreeing, you stop being loyal in their eyes. Arthur's arc in Red Dead Redemption 2 is one of the most beautifully crafted character journeys in gaming history. When we meet him, Arthur is Dutch's enforcer, the muscle, the man who does what needs to be done without asking too many questions. He believes in Dutch's philosophy because it's all he's ever known. He justifies the terrible things he does by telling himself they're for a greater purpose, that the gang is different from other outlaws because they have a code. But as the game progresses, Arthur is forced to confront the truth, that the code is flexible, that the philosophy is hollow, and that Dutch is leading them all to destruction.
The turning point for Arthur comes not from any single dramatic moment, but from an accumulation of small realizations. He sees Dutch shoot a woman in cold blood in Guarma and then lie about it. He watches Dutch leave John to die after a train robbery goes wrong. He hears Dutch making plans with Micah while excluding him. He sees Dutch using eagle flies in the Wapiti tribe as pawns in his schemes, manipulating a young man's anger the same way he once manipulated Arthur's. Each instance chips away at Arthur's faith until there's nothing left to believe in. And then comes the diagnosis that changes everything. When Arthur learns he has tuberculosis, it doesn't just mean he's dying. It means his time to make things right is limited. Every decision suddenly carries more weight because there are no more tomorrows to fix today's mistakes. This is where the game's honor system becomes truly meaningful. The choice isn't just about whether you want to be good or bad, it's about whether Arthur can redeem himself before he dies. Can a man who spent his life as an outlaw, who's killed and robbed and hurt people, find salvation in his final months? The game asks this question and leaves the answer up to the player. The beauty of Arthur's redemption arc is that it's not about grand gestures or dramatic pronouncements. It's about the small choices he makes every day, helping a widow learn to hunt so she can survive on her own, returning to families he's wronged and making amends, standing up to Dutch when it would be easier to stay silent, choosing to help John escape rather than seeking revenge. These aren't the actions of a saint. They're the actions of a man trying desperately to balance the scales before his time runs out. And the game acknowledges that some scales can never be balanced, that some things can't be forgiven, but that doesn't mean the attempt isn't worthwhile. What elevates Arthur's story from good to exceptional is Roger Clark's performance. The way Arthur's voice changes throughout the game, starting confident and loyal, gradually becoming more questioning and weary, and finally achieving a kind of peace and acceptance, is nothing short of masterful. You can hear the disease taking hold in his coughs and labored breathing. You can hear the disillusionment in how he talks about Dutch. You can hear the desperation in his conversations with John about escaping. And in the final missions, you can hear a man who knows he's dying, but has finally found something worth dying for. Not Dutch's dream, not the gang's survival, but giving his brother a chance at the life he never had. The game's willingness to let Arthur die is perhaps its boldest narrative choice. In an industry where player characters usually survive against all odds, where happy endings are expected if you play well enough, Red Dead Redemption 2 says no. Arthur Morgan dies. There's no secret ending where he survives if you make all the right choices. There's no last-minute cure for his tuberculosis. He dies on that mountain, and the manner of his death is the only thing you get to control.
High honor Arthur gets to watch the sunrise one last time at peace with his choices. Low honor Arthur gets shot in the face by Micah Bell, dying as violently as he lived. Both endings are fitting for the choices the player made, but both end the same way. Arthur doesn't get to see the world he helped create. He doesn't get to retire to a ranch or run away with Mary Linton. He dies, and the world moves on without him. This is where the epilogue becomes essential to understanding the game's themes. By switching to John Marston and jumping forward 8 years, the game shows us both the fruits of Arthur's sacrifice and the futility of it. John gets his ranch, his family, his chance at an honest life. He builds the house we see in the first game. He marries Abigail. He becomes a father to Jack. Everything Arthur wanted for him comes true, and it's genuinely beautiful to see. The missions where you build Beecher's hope, where John learns to ranch, where he proposes to Abigail, they're filled with hope and warmth. For a brief moment, it seems like maybe the cycle can be broken. Maybe John really can leave the outlaw life behind and live in peace.
But then Sadie Adler shows up with information about Micah's location, and John can't let it go. He can't leave the past behind. He has to get revenge for Arthur, for the gang, for everything they lost. And in doing so, he sets in motion the events that will lead to his own death in Red Dead Redemption 1. The Pinkertons find Micah's body, trace it back to John, and suddenly the Marston family is right back where the Vanderlyn gang was at the start of the game, being hunted by the law with nowhere to run. Arthur's sacrifice bought John 8 years of peace, 8 years to build something real, but it couldn't break the cycle of violence. John's inability to let go, his need for revenge, despite Arthur literally telling him that revenge is a fool's game, dooms him just as surely as Dutch's pride doomed the gang. The cyclical nature of violence is one of the game's most persistent themes. Every act of revenge creates the need for another act of revenge. Dutch kills Colm O'Driscoll's brother, so Colm kills Annabelle. Dutch kills Colm, but that doesn't bring anyone back or make anything better. Sadie Adler loses her husband to the O'Driscolls and spends the entire game hunting them down. And when she finally gets her revenge, she's left hollow and directionless, spending her days in saloons between bounty hunting jobs. John kills Micah for what he did to Arthur and the gang, and it costs him everything he built. The game shows us again and again that revenge doesn't heal wounds, it just creates new ones. This is contrasted beautifully with the stories of those who manage to break the cycle. Charles Smith helps the gang, stands with Arthur until the end, but then leaves to find peace elsewhere. Reverend Swanson overcomes his addictions and opens a church in New York. Mary Beth becomes a successful author. Pearson opens a store and settles down. Tilly gets married and starts a family. These people find redemption by letting go of the past and building something new. They don't seek revenge. They don't cling to the outlaw life. They move forward, and crucially, they survive. The game rewards those who can change and punishes those who can't. The Wapiti tribe storyline serves as a parallel to the Vanderlyn gang story and reinforces these themes about change and adaptation. Rainsfall, the chief, understands that the old ways are dying. He knows his people can't win a war against the U.S. government. He advocates for peace, for finding a way to survive in the new world rather than dying in a futile attempt to preserve the old one. His son Eagleflies refuses to accept this. He's young, angry, and convinced that fighting is the only honorable choice. Dutch recognizes this anger and uses it, manipulating Eagleflies into starting a war that Dutch knows the tribe can't win, all to create a distraction for the gang's escape. Eagleflies dies in the oil refinery, killed by the very system his father warned him about. His death accomplishes nothing except proving Rainsfall right. The old ways are dead, and fighting against the tide of progress only gets you killed. This isn't presented as a good thing. The game is quite clear that what the U.S. government did to Native Americans was a genocide.
that the civilization spreading across the West came at a terrible cost. But it acknowledges the reality that you can't fight history. You can only choose how you respond to it. Rainsfall chooses survival and finds a kind of peace, taking the tribe north to Canada. Eagleflies chooses to fight and dies for nothing. Dutch van der Linde chooses to rage against the dying of the light and destroys everyone around him. Arthur Morgan chooses acceptance and finds redemption in his final days. The game's setting in 1899 is crucial to all of this. It's a year of transition, the cusp of a new century, the end of one era and the beginning of another. The Wild West of dime novels and legends is being replaced by industrialization, urbanization, and federal authority. Towns are growing into cities. Trains and telegraphs connect the country. The Pinkertons, essentially a private army for wealthy industrialists, hunt down anyone who threatens the established order. Cornwall, representing the new breed of American capitalist, has more power than any outlaw gang could dream of. The romantic notion of the lone gunman living free is being crushed under the weight of organized society. Dutch's fundamental failure is his inability to recognize this change. He keeps making plans to get one more big score and then escape to Tahiti or Australia. But there is no escape. The world he wants to escape to doesn't exist anymore. Every steamship requires papers. Every territory has law enforcement. Every corner of the globe is being brought under government control. The gang could run forever and it wouldn't matter. They're not being hunted because of what they did in Blackwater. They're being hunted because of what they represent. A challenge to authority. A rejection of civilization's rules. A remnant of a world that's not allowed to exist anymore. Hosea Matthews understood this. Before his death, Hosea repeatedly tries to convince Dutch to pack it in, to take what they have and disappear before it's too late. He sees the writing on the wall. He knows they're fighting a losing battle. But Dutch can't accept it, because accepting it would mean admitting that everything he's built, his gang, his philosophy, his entire identity, was built on a foundation that's crumbling. So he doubles down, makes increasingly desperate and reckless plans, and leads everyone to their doom. Hosea's death in the St. Denis bank robbery is the gang's point of no return. With him gone, there's no one left who can talk sense into Dutch. No one whose opinion Dutch values enough to actually listen to. The St. Denis bank robbery is a masterclass in building tension and delivering tragedy. The entire chapter builds to it, with Dutch planning to rob the biggest bank in the city for one final score that will set them up forever. Everything goes wrong in the most spectacular way possible. Cornwall shows up and gets killed, ensuring the law will come down hard. The Pinkertons are already there waiting, having been tipped off by Micah. In the escape, Hosea and Lenny are both killed. John gets captured. The rest barely make it out alive and end up on a boat to Guarma. It's the beginning of the end. The moment where the cracks in the gang become fractures, and the fractures become a complete break. Guarma is controversial among fans. Some see it as an unnecessary detour that breaks the game's pacing. Others appreciate it as a chance to see the characters outside their element and to witness Dutch's mask slipping. I fall into the latter camp. Guarma strips away all the pretense of the gang's mission. They're not robbing to get money to escape. They're not fighting for freedom or because of some noble code. They're just trying to survive. And in the process, they help a dictator massacre his own people. Dutch's murder of the old woman, executed in cold blood for no reason other than his paranoia, shows Arthur exactly who Dutch really is when no one's watching. The lie Dutch tells afterward is almost worse than the murder, showing that he knows what he did was wrong but will never admit it. When they return from Guarma, everything is different. The gang is scattered, broken, paranoid. Molly is dead, killed by Susan Grimshaw for supposedly being a rat, though we later learn she never talked. The camp has been moved to a swamp in Limon, a miserable location that reflects their miserable situation. Dutch is openly hostile to anyone who questions him. Micah has become his right-hand man. The remaining members are just going through the motions, too scared or too loyal to leave, but knowing in their hearts it's over. This is where the game's pace shifts from the adventure of outlaws on the run to the slow-motion collapse of everything they built. Chapter 6 is a dirge. Every mission feels like a funeral. Arthur is visibly sick, coughing constantly, moving slower. The camp is quiet with fewer interactions between members and more people keeping to themselves. The missions Dutch plans become increasingly desperate, from asking the U.S. government for help to robbing a train one more time to trying to rob an oil refinery. Nothing works because nothing can work. The gang's fate was sealed the moment they walked into that bank in St. Denis, maybe even earlier. All that's left is to see how many people Dutch will drag down with him.
The game gives Arthur two paths in these final chapters. He can continue trying to help Dutch and the gang, or he can focus on helping those he cares about escape. The missions with Sadie Adler, where you hunt down the last of the O'Driscolls, give Arthur a chance to help someone find closure. The missions with Charles Smith, where you help the Wapiti tribe, give Arthur a chance to do something genuinely good. The missions helping John's family give Arthur a chance to save someone from the fate he couldn't escape. These optional missions are easy to miss, but they're essential to Arthur's redemption arc. They're the difference between a man who dies an outlaw and a man who dies trying to make amends. The confrontation with Strauss, where Arthur kicks him out of camp for preying on the desperate, is a perfect example of Arthur's growth. Early in the game, Arthur beats Thomas Downs nearly to death over a debt, contracting tuberculosis in the process. It's a mission that feels wrong while you're doing it, but Arthur does it anyway because Dutch wants the money. By the end, Arthur can't stomach it anymore. He sees what the debt collecting has done to families, how it's ruined lives for a handful of dollars, and he can't be part of it. Even knowing it might anger Dutch, even knowing he needs every ally he can get, Arthur does the right thing. It's a small moment, easily missed, but it shows how far he's come. The game's final act is a masterpiece of interactive storytelling. After discovering that Micah is the rat, after watching Dutch manipulate eagleflies to his death, after seeing Abigail captured and Dutch refuse to help her, Arthur finally breaks. He saves Abigail himself, kills Agent Milton, and returns to camp ready to confront Dutch. The standoff between Arthur, John, and Dutch, with Micah whispering poison in Dutch's ear and the rest of the gang watching in horror, is electric. When Susan Grimshaw takes Arthur's side and Micah shoots her dead, Dutch's response tells you everything you need to know. He doesn't mourn her. He doesn't react at all. He just sides with Micah and lets his former lover bleed out on the ground. The Pinkertons' assault on the camp forces the issue. Arthur and John fight their way through, desperately trying to escape. The game gives you one final choice: help John get to his family or go back for the money. It's a test of everything Arthur has learned. Has he truly changed, or is he the same man who followed Dutch without question? Choosing to help John is the culmination of Arthur's arc. It's him explicitly rejecting Dutch's philosophy, rejecting the outlaw life,
and choosing to sacrifice himself so someone else can live. Choosing the money is staying true to the old ways, prioritizing wealth over people, and it results in a fitting death at Micah's hands. The high honor ending, where Arthur helps John and dies watching the sunrise, is one of gaming's most powerful moments. After everything, after all the violence and mistakes and regrets, Arthur finds peace. He knows John made it. He knows his death meant something. The choice of music here is perfect, a quiet, mournful piece that acknowledges the tragedy while celebrating the redemption. Arthur's final words to Dutch, "I gave you all I had," are both an accusation and a goodbye. He gave everything to Dutch's dream, and Dutch threw it all away. But in the end, Arthur found something worth more than Dutch's approval. He found his own sense of right and wrong. The low honor ending, where Arthur kills Arthur as he crawls away, is brutal and fitting in its own way. This Arthur never found redemption. He remained selfish and violent to the end, going back for money when he could have helped his brother. He dies as he lived, in violence and desperation. The game doesn't pull punches here. If you played Arthur as a monster, he dies like one. But even this ending has a tragic beauty to it. Arthur's final expression is one of defiance. He never breaks, never begs, he goes out fighting, which is probably how this version of Arthur would want it. The epilogue is necessary to complete the thematic journey. We need to see John build his ranch, start his family, and find peace. We need to see that Arthur's sacrifice wasn't entirely in vain. The missions building Beecher Hope are some of the most satisfying in the game because they represent everything the gang was supposed to be about. Building something, working together, creating a home. When John proposes to Abigail in the middle of the lake, it's a genuinely happy moment in a game that's been building toward tragedy for dozens of hours.
But we also need to see John make the same mistake everyone else made. When Sadie shows up with information on Micah, John should walk away. He has everything Arthur wanted him to have. He's free. He's safe. He's with his family. But he can't let it go. He has to get revenge. And in getting that revenge, he puts himself back on the Pinkertons' radar, setting up the events of Red Dead Redemption 1. The game is showing us that the cycle continues. Dutch infected John and Arthur with his poison, and even with Dutch gone and Arthur dead, John can't break free of it. He's doomed by the same violence that doomed everyone else. The final mission, American Venom, is cathartic in the moment but hollow in hindsight. You fight through Micah's gang, kill everyone in your path, and finally put a bullet in Micah Bell. Dutch shows up, has a moment of clarity where he realizes Micah was the rat all along, and shoots him himself before walking away into the snow. It feels like closure. The villain is dead, the gang is avenged, and John has his money. But as the camera pans over Micah's body and the Pinkerton agents investigating the scene, you realize what this means. John just signed his own death warrant. In 8 years, Agent Ross will show up at his ranch and force him to hunt down his old gang members. In 8 years, John will die on that same ranch, gunned down by the army. Arthur's sacrifice bought John time, but it couldn't save him. This is why Red Dead Redemption 2 is a masterpiece. It's not because of the technical achievement, though the level of detail is staggering. It's not because of the gameplay, though the moment-to-moment action is satisfying. It's because the game tells a genuinely tragic story about the cost of loyalty, the inevitability of change, and the possibility of redemption in a way that no other game has matched. It earns every emotional beat through careful character development and thematic consistency. It doesn't offer easy answers or cheap sentiment. It looks at the myths of the Wild West and shows us the human cost of those myths.
The game understands that Dutch's philosophy is appealing. We all want to believe in freedom from systems that constrain us, in loyalty to those we care about, in living by a code that means something. But the game also shows us that these ideals can be twisted, that loyalty can become blind obedience, that freedom can become selfishness, and that codes can be used to justify terrible things. Dutch isn't evil in a mustache-twirling villain sense. He's evil in a much more human and recognizable way. He's a narcissist who convinced himself and others that his desires were noble goals. He's a man who believed his own mythology so completely that he couldn't see reality anymore. Arthur's tragedy is that he dedicated his life to Dutch's dream before realizing it was hollow. But his redemption is that he recognized the truth and used his remaining time to help those he could. He couldn't save himself, couldn't undo the things he'd done, couldn't escape the consequences of his choices, but he could give John a chance. He could help the Downs family. He could stand up to Dutch when others wouldn't. He could die on his own terms, with his own code, not Dutch's. That's the redemption the title refers to. Not salvation in any religious sense, but the act of reclaiming your soul from someone who claimed to own it. John's story across both games becomes even more tragic when viewed as a complete arc. He's the one who got away twice. He left the gang for a year and came back. Arthur literally died to give him a second chance to leave. And both times, John eventually ends up right back in the violence. In Red Dead Redemption 1, he thinks he's doing it for noble reasons, to save his family. But the game shows us that you can't build a peaceful life on a foundation of violence. The cycle continues until the cycle is broken. And the only way to break it is to refuse to participate. Rainsfall understood this. Charles understood this, but John never could, and it destroys him and nearly destroys his family. The game's epilogue ends with Jack Marston standing over Agent Ross's body in 1914, having just taken revenge for his father's death. The implication is clear. The cycle continues. Jack grew up surrounded by violence, watched his father get gunned down, and learned that the only way to solve problems is with a gun. In seeking revenge for John, he's probably put himself on the government's radar, ensuring he'll never live the peaceful life his father wanted for him. 3 generations, Arthur, John, and Jack, all doomed by the same cycle of violence. It's bleak, but it's honest.
Red Dead Redemption 2 could have been a simple power fantasy about cool cowboys doing cool things. There's certainly enough of that in the game to satisfy players looking for that experience. But Rockstar chose to tell a more complex, more mature story about the death of an era and the men who couldn't adapt to the new world. It's a story about how the myths we tell ourselves can destroy us, about how loyalty without questioning enables terrible people, about how violence begets violence until someone chooses to break the cycle. The game is a masterpiece because it commits fully to its themes and never compromises for the sake of a happy ending. Arthur dies. The gang falls apart. Dutch becomes a monster. John dooms himself seeking revenge. There's no secret ending where everyone lives happily ever after if you just make all the right choices. The story is a tragedy, and tragedies end with death. But within that tragedy, there's beauty in the small moments of grace. Arthur watching the sunrise, John proposing to Abigail, Charles leaving to find peace, Sadie becoming her own person. These moments don't erase the tragedy, but they give it meaning. What elevates Red Dead Redemption 2 above almost every other game is that it trusts its audience to sit with difficult emotions and complex themes. It doesn't spell everything out or offer easy moral judgments. Dutch is a villain, but he genuinely believes he's the hero. Arthur does terrible things, but he's trying to be better. John loves his family, but he can't escape his nature. Micah is irredeemably evil, but he's also a product of the world he was raised in. Everyone is human, flawed and complicated, trying to survive in a world that's changing faster than they can adapt. The game asks profound questions about morality, loyalty, and change without ever claiming to have all the answers. Can a bad man become good? Yes, but it requires work and sacrifice and accepting consequences. Can loyalty be toxic? Absolutely, when it's loyalty to a person rather than to principles. Is violence ever justified? The game suggests that sometimes it is, but it always costs something, and the cost compounds over time. Can you escape your past? Maybe, if you're willing to truly leave it behind, but most people aren't. These aren't questions with simple answers, and the game respects that complexity. It presents different perspectives through different characters and lets players draw their own conclusions. Rain's Fall represents wisdom and acceptance. Eagle Flies represents righteous anger. Arthur represents redemption. John represents the inability to break cycles. Dutch represents the danger of charisma without conscience. Each character embodies a different philosophy, and the game shows us the consequences of each approach. The world of Red Dead Redemption 2 feels alive in a way few games achieve. The random encounters where you help strangers or choose to rob them. The conversations at camp that reveal character histories and relationships. The way NPCs go about their daily lives, working jobs, eating meals, going to sleep. The animals behaving according to their species. The weather changing naturally. The way towns feel different from each other, each with their own character and culture. All of this serves the story by making the world feel real, making it matter when that world changes. When you see the trains bringing more people west, when you see towns growing and modernizing, when you see the Pinkertons becoming more organized and effective, you're watching the death of the world these characters inhabit. The immersion isn't just technical wizardry, it's thematically essential. The attention to historical detail reinforces the game's themes about the end of an era. You can see the transition happening in real time. Valentine is a rough frontier town full of mud and livestock. Saint Denis is a modern city with electric lights and streetcars. Blackwater is somewhere in between, growing rapidly and becoming more civilized. The contrast shows you exactly what's being lost and what's being gained. The Wild West had freedom and possibility, but it also had violence and chaos. Civilization brings order and safety, but it also brings control and conformity. The game doesn't pick sides. It shows you both and lets you feel the loss even as you recognize the necessity. The Native American storyline is handled with surprising nuance for a video game. The Wapiti tribe isn't presented as noble savages or historical curiosities. They're people trying to survive genocide. The game is unflinching about what the U.S. government did to them and is doing to them. You see their land being stolen for oil. You see them being forced onto smaller and smaller reservations.
You see young men like eagle flies driven to violence by the injustice they're experiencing, and you see men like Rainsfall trying to preserve what they can by accepting the unacceptable. It's not a comfortable storyline, and it doesn't have a happy ending. The tribe leaves for Canada, which is presented as their best option, but it's still displacement. It's still loss. The game lets that tragedy sit without trying to redeem it or make it palatable. What makes this storyline work in the context of the larger narrative is how it parallels the Van der Linde gang's situation. Both groups are being hunted by the government. Both are remnants of a world that's disappearing. Both have older, wiser leaders advocating for survival and younger, angrier members advocating for resistance. The difference is that Rainsfall truly cares about his people's survival more than his pride. Dutch cares more about his pride than his gang's survival. Rainsfall is willing to swallow his pride and accept help from Arthur to save what he can. Dutch refuses to admit mistakes even as everyone around him dies. The parallel shows us what Dutch could have been if he actually believed the things he said about family and loyalty. Charles Smith's relationship with the tribe adds another layer. As someone who's half Native American, he understands what's happening to them in a way the others can't. His missions with Arthur to help the tribe are some of the game's most straightforward morally. You're not robbing or killing for personal gain, you're helping people survive. Charles represents what the gang could have been if Dutch's philosophy was genuine, using their skills to protect those who need protecting, rather than just enriching themselves. After Arthur's death, Charles leaves to find his own path, suggesting that he learned the lesson Arthur tried to teach. You can't save everyone, but you can save yourself by choosing to be better. Sadie Adler's arc is fascinating because it's both empowering and tragic. When we meet her, she's just lost her husband to the O'Driscolls and is paralyzed by grief. Over the course of the game, she transforms into one of the gang's most capable fighters. She takes charge when others hesitate. She survives when many don't. But the game never presents this transformation as purely positive. Sadie becomes so consumed by revenge that she loses sight of everything else. Her recklessness gets people killed. Her inability to let go of her hatred leaves her empty by the end. She's alive, she's free, but she has nothing to live for except violence. The game suggests that surviving isn't the same as living, that becoming hard enough to survive in a hard world might cost you the parts of yourself that made life worth living. The relationship between Sadie and Arthur is one of the game's most interesting because it's not romantic. They're just two people who understand each other's pain and help each other survive. Arthur sees Sadie's grief and helps her channel it into something productive, teaching her to shoot and fight. Sadie sees Arthur's sickness and mortality and treats him with more honesty than most of the gang, not coddling him or pretending everything will be fine. Their final missions together, hunting down the O'Driscolls and rescuing Abigail, feel like two broken people trying to do something good before it's too late. The game rarely gets enough credit for depicting a meaningful friendship between a man and woman without forcing romance into it.
The supporting cast of the gang is remarkably well developed for characters who don't have major story roles. Lenny Summers is young and idealistic, reading books and trying to better himself while also being a capable outlaw. His death is sudden and meaningless, killed by Pinkertons on a roof in Saint Denis. And that's the point. Not everyone gets a dramatic death scene. Sometimes good people just die and the world moves on. Sean McGuire is loud and obnoxious, but genuinely cares about the gang. His death in Rhodes shocks everyone because he seemed invincible in his own mind. The game doesn't telegraph these deaths. It just happens, violently and quickly, reminding you that no one is safe. Karen Jones' descent into alcoholism is heartbreaking to watch. She starts the game as a capable grifter who helps plan successful heists. After Sean's death, she starts drinking more. As the gang falls apart, she drinks constantly. By the end, she's barely functional. And after the gang dissolves, she simply disappears. Tilly implies she drank herself to death, and no one even knows for sure. It's a brutal illustration of how trauma and grief destroy people when they have no support system. The gang was supposed to be that support system, but when it fell apart, people like Karen fell through the cracks. Molly O'Shea's story is pure tragedy. She loves Dutch, genuinely, but he only sees her as a possession. When he starts ignoring her, she becomes isolated because she never bonded with the other women in camp. She doesn't work, doesn't contribute, and sits around waiting for Dutch to pay attention to her. Her growing paranoia and desperation culminate in her drunkenly confessing to being a rat, which gets her killed by Susan Grimshaw. Later, Agent Milton reveals she never actually talked, meaning she died for nothing. She was so desperate to matter, to have some impact on Dutch's life, that she claimed responsibility for the gang's troubles, even though she had nothing to do with them. It's a devastating portrayal of how toxic relationships destroy people from the inside out. Uncle is comic relief throughout the game, but even he has depth if you pay attention. He's lazy and drinks too much and constantly complains about his terminal lumbago, but he's also one of the most loyal members. He never questions Arthur or John. He never causes drama. He's just there, and when things get bad, he fights alongside everyone else. In the epilogue, you can find a newspaper article about him opening a church in New York. He escaped, he changed, and he built a new life. His arc proves that leaving is possible, that redemption is real, but it requires making the hard choice to walk away from everything you know. Most of the gang can't do that. Swampson could, and it saved him. Josiah Trelawney is another character who survives by knowing when to leave. He's never fully part of the gang, maintaining a separate life with a family they know nothing about. He helps them with cons and heists, but keeps his distance. When things get dangerous, he disappears for long stretches. The game implies he survives because he was never as invested in Dutch's dream as the others. He saw the gang as a means to an end, not as his identity. It's a mercenary approach, but it works. Sometimes loyalty gets you killed, and Trelawney understood that better than most.
Leopold Strauss is interesting because he's not a fighter or a schemer. He's a loan shark, and his role in the gang is extracting money from desperate people through predatory lending. The game makes you participate in this through the debt collection missions, which feel wrong in a way that robbing trains or shooting O'Driscolls doesn't. You're not targeting criminals or the wealthy. You're beating up poor people who made bad financial decisions. Thomas Downs, the man whose beating gives Arthur tuberculosis, becomes the physical manifestation of Arthur's sins. Every time Arthur coughs, it's a reminder of what he did to that family. Kicking Strauss out of camp near the end is Arthur's way of rejecting that part of his life, even if it's too late to change the consequences. The choice of tuberculosis as Arthur's disease is thematically perfect. In 1899, TB was essentially a death sentence for most people, especially for someone living Arthur's lifestyle. There was no cure, no treatment that would save him. It's a disease that kills slowly, giving Arthur time to reflect on his life and make choices about how he wants to spend his remaining days. It's also a disease he got from hurting an innocent person, making it a form of poetic justice. The game could have given him cancer or a heart condition or any other terminal illness,
but TB specifically carries the weight of consequence. He got it from violence, and it will kill him no matter what he does afterward. The way the game handles Arthur's declining health is remarkable. Early on, you might notice a cough here or there, but it's easy to dismiss. After the diagnosis, it becomes constant. Arthur moves slower, gets winded easier, looks visibly sick in cutscenes. His voice becomes raspier. Other characters notice and comment on it. The game never lets you forget that Arthur is dying, which makes every moment more precious. When he takes time to watch a sunset, or have a quiet conversation, or help someone in need, it hits differently because you know his time is limited. The disease transforms the gameplay experience without changing the mechanics, which is brilliant design. The honor system in Red Dead Redemption 2 is simple but effective. You're not making complex moral choices about the greater good or choosing between bad options. You're choosing whether Arthur will be cruel or kind in his daily interactions, greeting people or antagonizing them, helping someone or robbing them, killing unnecessarily or showing mercy. These small choices accumulate to create two different versions of Arthur, and the game acknowledges both as valid interpretations of the character. Low honor Arthur is bitter and violent, angry at the world for his circumstances. High honor Arthur is trying to be better, seeking redemption for a lifetime of bad choices. Both versions work within the story because the arc isn't about Arthur becoming good, it's about whether he can become better. The game rewards high honor more than low honor, which is intentional. Being good in Red Dead Redemption 2 is harder than being evil. It requires restraint, effort, and often going out of your way to help people. Low honor is the path of least resistance, taking what you want and killing anyone who gets in your way. But the high honor ending is so much more emotionally satisfying that the game essentially argues that being good is worth the extra effort. Arthur dying at peace, having helped John escape and made amends where he could, is a better ending than Arthur dying angry and alone. The game has a moral framework, but it lets you violate that framework and shows you the consequences.
The strange man from Red Dead Redemption 1 makes a subtle appearance in this game, and his presence adds layers of mystical ambiguity to the otherwise grounded story. You never meet him directly, but you can find his cabin with cryptic messages on the walls and a painting that slowly completes itself, showing the strange man's face. The cabin changes based on your honor level, with the painting showing either a deer or a wolf. The implication is that the strange man is watching, judging, waiting. Whether he's God or the devil or death itself is left ambiguous, but his presence suggests that there are forces beyond human understanding at work, that maybe some of what happens isn't just random chance, but part of a larger design. This touches on one of the game's subtler themes, fate versus free will. Dutch constantly talks about plans and destiny, about how they're meant for something greater. But his plans always fail, and his destiny is self-destruction. The game's opening text tells you the gang will be destroyed, but you still play through it, hoping somehow things will turn out differently. Arthur's diagnosis seems like cruel fate, but it's actually the consequence of his choices. John's death in Red Dead Redemption 1 seems inevitable once he goes after Micah, but he could have walked away. The game suggests that while circumstances might be beyond our control, how we respond to those circumstances is always our choice. Arthur can't avoid dying, but he can choose to die well. The mission design in Red Dead Redemption 2 has been criticized for being too linear, and that criticism has merit. But the linearity serves the story. You're not playing as a blank slate character. You're playing as Arthur Morgan, a specific person with specific skills and limitations. The missions unfold the way they do because that's how Arthur would approach them.
The freedom is in how you engage with the open world between missions, in the choices you make about honor and helping people, in how you spend time at camp or avoid it, in how you customize Arthur's appearance and equipment. The main missions are telling a story, and that story has a structure it needs to follow to be effective. The game's length is both a strength and a weakness. At 60+ hours for a complete playthrough, it's a massive time investment. The slow pace and long animations can feel tedious, especially on replay. But that length is necessary for the emotional payoff to work. You need to spend time with these characters, need to experience the routine of camp life, need to feel the slow decline of the gang for the ending to hurt as much as it does. If the game was 20 hours, Arthur's death wouldn't carry the same weight. If you could speed through everything, you wouldn't feel the passage of time that makes the themes about change and mortality resonate. The game demands your time, and in return, it delivers an emotional experience that shorter games can't match.
The violence in Red Dead Redemption 2 is extreme, and that's intentional. The game doesn't glorify violence the way some action games do. It's brutal and messy. Bodies don't disappear. Blood pools on the ground. People scream and beg. The game wants you to feel the weight of every kill, to understand that these are people you're ending, not just targets. This makes the shootouts less fun in a traditional sense, but more meaningful thematically. Every robbery that goes wrong, every ambush, every mission where you have to kill dozens of lawmen, it all adds to Arthur's burden. You're not a hero. You're a killer trying to justify your actions, and the game never lets you forget that. The epilogue's decision to switch to John Marston is brilliant for several reasons. It provides closure for Arthur's story while opening up John's. It shows the consequences of Arthur's sacrifice and whether it mattered. It connects the two games' narratives and makes Red Dead Redemption 1 hit harder when you replay it, knowing John's full history. And it gives players who couldn't let go of Arthur something to hold on to, a character they already know and love, who carries Arthur's legacy forward. The epilogue is also tonally different from the main game, more hopeful and lighter until the very end, which makes it clear that a new chapter has begun even as old ghosts come back to haunt. Building Beecher's hope is pure wish fulfillment. After watching everything fall apart, you get to build something. After watching characters die and dreams crumble, you get to see something grow. The montages of John, Charles, and Uncle working together, the house slowly taking shape, Abigail and Jack returning. It's the happy ending the main story never gave you. And it makes the inevitable tragedy more painful. You know from playing the first game that John dies at Beecher's Hope. You know this happiness is temporary. But for a few missions, you get to pretend it's not. And that makes it hurt more when reality sets in. The mission where John proposes to Abigail is one of the game's purest moments. They row out into the lake, and John, being John, struggles to get the words out. He's not eloquent like Dutch. He doesn't have Arthur's wit. He's just a man who loves his family and wants to make things right. The proposal is simple and sincere, and Abigail's acceptance is relief and joy. For a moment, everything is perfect. The game gives you that moment because it knows what's coming. It lets you believe in the possibility of redemption and peaceful endings before showing you that the past never stays buried. The final hunt for Micah is cathartic but hollow. Micah absolutely deserves to die for what he did to the gang, but killing him doesn't bring anyone back. It doesn't change what happened, and it puts John right back in the life Arthur died to save him from. The music during the mission is incredible, building from quiet tension to explosive action.
The gunfight through Micah's camp is satisfying. The showdown where Dutch appears and everything stops is powerful. But none of it changes the fundamental truth that revenge doesn't heal wounds. It just creates new ones. John's revenge costs him everything, just like everyone who came before him.
Dutch's final appearance in the game is perfect. He shows up at Micah's camp, and there's a moment where it could go either way. He could side with Micah, could kill John, could do anything. But he shoots Micah instead, finally seeing the truth Arthur tried to tell him. Then he walks away without a word, leaving John alive and leaving the money behind. It's not redemption. Dutch will go on to do terrible things in the years between this game and the first one, but it's acknowledgement. He finally sees what Micah was and what he himself became. That moment of clarity doesn't save him or change him, but it suggests that somewhere deep down, the man Hosea and Arthur believed in still existed, buried under years of pride and paranoia and self-destruction. The game ends with John at peace, having paid off his loan and married Abigail. The credits show various gang members and what happened to them. Some survived and found happiness. Some died violently. Some just disappeared. And then the final image of the Pinkertons finding Micah's body and tracking it back to John, setting up the first game. The circle closes. The cycle continues. And you realize that everything you just experienced, all the hope and redemption and sacrifice, bought John exactly 8 years of peace before the past caught up with him again. Red Dead Redemption 2 is a masterpiece because it understands what stories are for. They're not just entertainment, though it's certainly entertaining. They're how we process big questions about life, death, morality, loyalty, and change. The game asks what it means to live a good life when you've done bad things. It asks whether loyalty is always virtuous or sometimes toxic. It asks if people can change or if we're doomed to repeat our mistakes. It asks what we owe to each other and what we owe to ourselves. These aren't questions with easy answers, and the game doesn't pretend they are. Instead, it shows us different characters trying to answer them in different ways, and lets us see the consequences of their choices. The game is a masterpiece because it earns every emotional moment through careful setup and payoff. Arthur's death hits as hard as it does because you've spent 60 hours with him. Dutch's betrayal stings because you saw him at his best and understood why people followed him. John's happiness in the epilogue feels precious because you know it's temporary. Nothing is cheap or manipulative. The game does the work to make you care, and then it pays that off with moments that stay with you long after you've finished playing. That's craft at the highest level, using every tool the medium provides to create an experience that couldn't exist in any other form. The game is a masterpiece because it respects its themes enough to commit to them fully. The Wild West is dying, so the gang dies with it. Arthur seeks redemption, so he has to sacrifice himself to achieve it. Violence begets violence, so everyone who chooses violence suffers for it. The game never compromises these themes for the sake of giving players what they might want. It tells the story it needs to tell, even when that story is uncomfortable or tragic. That kind of artistic integrity is rare in any medium, but especially in AAA video games that cost hundreds of millions of dollars and need to appeal to as many people as possible. The game is a masterpiece because it understands that the details matter. The way Arthur's journal changes based on your choices, the way his appearance reflects how you've been playing, the way NPCs remember you and reference previous encounters,
the way camp dynamics shift as the story progresses, the way the world changes to reflect the passage of time and the spread of civilization. All of these details could have been skipped, and the game would still function, but they transform it from a good game to an unforgettable one. They create immersion not through realistic graphics alone, but through systemic depth that makes the world feel like it exists beyond your interactions with it. The game is a masterpiece because it created characters people genuinely care about. Arthur Morgan is discussed and analyzed and celebrated as one of gaming's greatest protagonists, and rightfully so. But he's surrounded by a cast of equally well-realized characters who all have their own arcs and motivations and personalities. The fact that you can have deep discussions about what Dutch's true nature is, or whether John made the right choice going after Micah, or what Sadie's arc says about revenge and grief, speaks to how well-written and well-performed these characters are. They're not just vehicles for gameplay, they're people, flawed and complex and human. Most importantly, Red Dead Redemption 2 is a masterpiece because it made people feel something profound. Games can be fun, can be challenging, can be beautiful, but the ones that last are the ones that touch something deeper. This game made people cry, made them think about their own choices and relationships, made them reflect on loyalty and change and mortality. It used the unique affordances of the video game medium, the time investment, the interactivity, the immersion, to create an emotional experience that hits differently than a book or movie could. That's what makes it not just a great game, but a great work of art, something that will be studied and analyzed and celebrated for years to come. When you finally put the controller down after watching those credits roll, you're not thinking about the mechanics or the graphics or the length. You're thinking about Arthur watching that sunrise. You're thinking about Dutch walking away into the snow. You're thinking about John proposing to Abigail. You're thinking about everything that was lost and everything that was saved. And you carry those thoughts with you because that's what masterpieces do. They change you slightly, add something to your understanding of the world, make you feel connected to people who never existed outside of code and voice acting and brilliant writing. Red Dead Redemption 2 does all of that and more. It's a western, a tragedy, a meditation on mortality, and the greatest video game story ever told. And that's why it's a masterpiece.